G'day, and welcome to the Seacreatures Podcast, the show all about the amazing animals that live beneath the waves. Each episode we chat about a specific sea creature with a guest who has spent time and interacted with this ocean animal. Our guests range from marine biologists to underwater photographers, citizen scientists, scuba divers, and anyone with an intense passion for marine life. My name is Matt Testoni, and I'm all of the above. And joining me for this episode of the Seacreatures Podcast is Madi Green, and she's a forensic fisheries ecologist, which is a pretty awesome title. And we're going to be talking all about the world of sharks. Welcome to the show, Madi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, kick us off with how you got so interested in sharks and why you love them so much.
Okay, well, I've been one of those kids who has sort of followed their dreams. So when I was younger, I was like, I really like sharks. They look really cool. I used to watch a lot of documentaries when I was little, and they always, were portrayed as really scary creatures with big teeth. And I kind of thought, I thought they were really cool. And so I said very boldly at like the age of, 13, 14, I'm going to be a shark scientist. And I think my family and everyone are like, yeah, okay, mate, like you'll probably be an accountant. Don't worry about it. Yeah, but I was stubborn and I decided that shark scientist was what I was going to be. So when I left my high school, I then moved to JCU, which is James Cook University, to do marine biology. And that was kind of the start of my marine biology career.
Cool. Well, so you moved up to there and to JCU. And I should mention that Maddie's in Tasmania. So you've moved to JCU to study in the tropics and back to the cold.
Yeah, so I was from country Victoria originally and then moved up to Queensland to do my undergraduate and my honours degree. So there's been a lot of university years to become a shark scientist. And then in 2015, I moved to Hobart to start my PhD.
Wow, cool. And so sharks are part of a group called elasmobranchs,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
And that's what rays and skates are as well. But what exactly are elasmobranchs and what makes a shark a shark?
Yeah, so rays, skates and chimeras and sharks all make up actually another group which is called chondrichthyes or the chondrichthyans, and that basically means that they all have cartilage for their bones. So if you think about in your nose or in your ears how it's kind of a bit wobbly and flexible, that's because those parts of our body are made with cartilage, and that's the bone structure throughout a whole shark. Or a ray, so that's like a flat shark. It's basically been rolled over, flattened. And then we have things like skates, which again are sort of flat sharks. And then you have things like chimeras, which are really cool, but they are one of the oldest lineages of things in the ocean in terms of vertebrae, so stuff with backbones. And they look like, well, you could Google them, maybe Google ghost sharks, and you get a really cool idea of these weird looking sea creatures that hang out right at the bottom of the ocean in like thousands of meters. And we don't know much about chimeras actually. So they all belong to that same group of elasmobranchs, or a higher order is chondrichthyes. And they all have cartilage, and none of them have swim bladders either. So what differentiates them from other fish, as well as their cartilage bones, is also that they don't have swim bladders to float and move around in the ocean, because you can imagine the ocean's like a really deep place, and so you've got to stay up in the water column, or you want to live in a certain habitat, so you have to be able to float in that habitat. So instead, sharks and rays, they have liver that is really oily or fatty, and they have this special oil in their liver called squalene, and that allows them to float.
Wow. I've also heard that some sharks swallow air and gulp air.
I think there are some. I mean, they have sphericals, which are these little holes in the side of their heads. And I think that they're also able to take in sort of oxygen and air as well. But mostly how they're keeping their position in the water column is kind of how we'd say that, is with their liver being so fatty. And it's often why you might have heard that people often say, sharks have to keep swimming. And that's because sometimes they are still a bit heavy, and so they might sink if they don't swim. Oh. So yeah, it's
wow.
They've got to keep moving. Some of them, other ones can sit on the floor happily and survive and thrive.
Yeah, because I was reading that some that sit on the floor can like pump water over their gills, but a lot that move have lost that ability.
So it depends on the species. What you find is the benthic is called like the bottom of the ocean. And so benthic dwellers are things like rays that are going to sit on the bottom, and people might have seen them in shallow water in the shores, big stingrays sitting on the sand. And so they have larger sphericals, and they allow you to pump water over the gills to keep them aerated. When we think about species in the pelagic, so that's, middle of the water column, they're not sitting on the bottom. The water, the sort of bottom of the water or the benthos might be far away, and those pelagic sharks really love to swim in that mid-column area, and so they're ones that often won't have larger sphericals because they're always moving anyway, so they don't need that ability to pump water over their gills.
Yeah, and that's where the common fact of they have to keep moving comes from.
Yeah, that comes from more of those pelagic sharks. And when we think about, if I say the word shark, I'm sure the image that comes to mind is a white shark or a tiger shark, or in the family carcharinids. So that's blacktip sharks, that's reef sharks. So all those ones have small sphericals, they're moving often, and the ones we think of less are often the ones that are hanging out on the bottom because we don't see them as much.
Yeah, cool. And I have to ask before we move on, they have cartilage, but what's the advantage of having cartilage instead of your standard bones like most vertebrates?
Yeah, good question. It makes them lighter. So I guess it's that thing of, fish have swim bladders because they're heavier and they need to stay in the water column. But a shark, if it was made of bones, it really would be sinking to the bottom, or energetically it would be so costly for them to be able to move around because they're so large. So I think by having cartilage, it's enabled them to grow into lots of different shapes and sizes without that weight in the water being a factor, and because they don't have swim bladders to hold them up as well. So they've had to come up with unique ways of being able to grow but stay in the habitats they want to stay in.
You mentioned some live in the water column, some live on the bottom, but talk us through a bit of how is the variety and what's the range of different sharks? There's so many species.
Yeah, there's about 12, give or take, there's around 1,200 species. So again, when people think of sharks, they're often thinking of one or two different species, or maybe a maximum of 10 you could probably name, but there are 1,200 different species of sharks and rays and chimeras. And they live everywhere. So the deep, deep depths of the ocean, which is where we find cool ghost sharks and chimeras. You have, a whole bunch of rays that live on sandy bottom areas that could be deep or shallow. You have big pelagic sharks like whale sharks, basking sharks, megamouth sharks. They're going to be swimming in the open ocean, not near any land. You have hammerhead sharks that enjoy, kind of reef areas and slopes. And then you have, a whole family of carcharinidae, which is hundreds of different sharks. And they're the reef kind of sharks, and they like to hang out on continental shelves near reef and around sort of where people will be bathing and stuff too, but they're often small. So, and again, sharks get these bad rap for being dangerous, but there are 1,200 bloody kinds of sharks, and the majority of them are truly harmless to humans.
Ahoy, it's Matt here. Just a quick pause to let you know I've got an exciting tabletop game coming out all about sustainable fishing and ocean literacy called Big Fish. More details at the end of the episode. Back to Sea Creatures. Yeah, and so what's your favourite species / group of sharks and why?
I think I get asked this question all the time and I never know how to answer. I've worked on a number of different species, so I think there are some that are close to my heart because I've worked on them and researched them for so long. So hammerheads for sure, scalloped there's 10 different kinds of hammerhead sharks, but the ones I love are scalloped hammerheads or Sapherna lewinii. I did a lot of population genetic work on them, so figuring out how genetically related different stocks are all around the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And they're super interesting because in Australia, we don't necessarily know where the large females go. So we see pregnant females pop up in Papua New Guinea, but we never really see large females on the continental shelf in Australia, but we do see large females in Fiji. And they all look genetically somewhat similar in the Pacific region, and at least the West Pacific region. And so it's a bit of a mystery, and it's crazy because they're such a popular shark and people like to dive with them. You know, there's big schools of them in Japan with lots of females. But on the Australia coastline, we really get a lot of small males, so sort of juvenile, sometimes adult males. I think recently they found a bunch of females off the coast of WA, and that might be because they move seasonally too. So you can kind of anticipate them at certain places at certain times, which is very cool. So I think they're a really cool shark. I think they have a cool, lifestyle in that seasonal movement. And I also like that they're still a bit of a mystery. So I want to, get a big grant and do some big research on them and tag some big ladies and see where they go in the Pacific. That would be super fun.
Yeah, solve the mysteries of the ocean. I mean, there's so many of them, but why do they call them scalloped hammerheads? How are they different?
Just the shape of their head. So often they're named by like the shape of their head. So you have a bonnet head, which has like a little, I guess it looks a bit like a bonnet hat, those old school hats. Then a scallop, it just has the scallop shapes indented.
Oh, so like a bit of a zigzaggy.
Yeah, like a wavy kind of scalloped pattern. Yeah. If like anyone's like an architect or interior design and they think of scalloped things, like that's the shape of their head. And then you have, what else is there? Oh my goodness, I should think of all the different bonnet heads. There's Zygina. I'm only thinking of the species names and I forget the common names. But often the common name is referring to their head shape or where they live.
So, and I have to ask this as well because I'm not 100% sure, even though I did a bit of research, but why do hammerheads have such an unusual shape head?
Yeah. It's a pretty weird head, and sometimes it helps them and I think sometimes it doesn't. So they have, where their mouth is on their body for all animals defines how they feed, right? So if your mouth is kind of underneath you, not at the front of your head, that means that you're going to be sort of eating things on the bottom of the floor, right? Because your mouth is sort of suited to being facing the benthos or the bottom of the ocean. So their big head has all these really incredible pores on them that we call ampullae of Lorenzini. And that means that they are these pores and they're filled with this kind of jelly, and they're able to detect electric beats. So like heartbeats or living things. It's like a sense that humans certainly don't have, but it basically, because they're in the water and they have these cool pores in their heads, and their head allows for more pores than a normal shark because they have such a wide area for these pores to be there. So it means that they're very, very good, and they've evolved, continuously to be good at being able to hunt food that's in the sand.
Ah, like different rays and...
Yeah, crabs and worms and all sorts of stuff. Rays for sure. They love to eat rays, little ones. Things like stingrays and all sorts of stuff that they would... they would go for.
Ah, cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just love asking weird questions, but like, are there different populations? Are the females going specifically one place and the males the other? And is that part of the mystery? We just don't know if they are, or is it an age thing? Like, tell us a little bit more about how they move and why they're a mystery still.
It's a bit of everything, really. So you get with a lot of different sharks that have large migratory patterns, you will often get what we call ontogenetic shifts in habitat use, and that means age. Ontogenetic means age. So that says that when they're pups or babies, they're going to be in one location, which is for hammerheads like inshore, and then when they become juveniles, they will move off shore usually, and it's usually when they're the least risk adverse too. Juveniles are like teenagers, so they're testing their abilities, they're maybe taking bites out of things that are too big for them, like they're learning, the world and what they should and shouldn't try and eat, basically. And then adults will have maybe a different movement to juveniles as well. So that's one kind of movement, I guess, that sharks show is between different ages. But then you also have sex bias dispersal. So that's where males and females will show different patterns. And we really do see that happens across many different sharks that like to move around. Females have a really cool thing called natal philopatry. So that basically means that they go back and return to the same place they were born to give birth to their own pups. So somehow they know what river mouth they were born at or what location, and they return there every year to give birth. And so that shows up in our genetic patterns. And so it was a real mystery at the start, in the 90s when they started doing population genetics on sharks, because they were like, what is this? Like this really strong pattern to say that one river basin is significantly different to another. And by river basin, I mean sort of ocean mouth. So where female sharks need to go, they need to drop their pups somewhere safe, and that's often shallow enclosed bays or estuaries, right? And so we were finding in the early 90s, not me, but my very lovely colleagues were finding these really strong genetic patterns between really closely located areas, and that doesn't really make sense because these sharks move a long way. They're meeting up with lots of other sharks. By kind of the laws of population genetics, you would imagine there's a lot of mixing, but there wasn't, or there were these strong signals. And so what they figured out through a lot of tagging and through genetics is that these females show these patterns. So they will come back to the same place to breed or give birth, usually give birth. So that's pretty interesting. And we still try and sort that out between species now, because there are some species that the males and females do what they want. They don't have patterns, but the females often will show this kind of philopatric behavior.
Yeah, okay. And so that would kind of explain why you find females in one spot and then males are just kind of roaming because they're just they have no plan, I guess, or they're just dispersing. Is that correct? Or
I think females are also roaming as much as males too. I think in shark science, and I might go on a bit of a tangent here, but it's been a pretty male-dominated place. And so it means that the kind of hypotheses that have been brought up, and it happens in all ecology actually, because, previously women weren't able to be scientists. So the kind of ideas about evolutionary biology and ecology and males versus females, there was often this thought that males are off being the most fit and doing the fitness things, and females are just being passively mated with, or females are just, busy being pregnant and then dropping the pups and they're caring more. Or it's funny how that's kind of come about, and what we realise now is that sure, males don't have any paternal care at all, male sharks, but the females actually have way more choice when it comes to, and way more invested in the quality and quantity of the offspring they're going to have. So it's important for them to roam. It's important for them to mate with multiple males, and it used to be that, multiple male sharks would be harassing and mating a female, but it's actually in her best interest to mate with multiple males too. So I think, we need to be careful sometimes when we talk about ecology and we gender it in a way that we have previously, and we look at it with our stereotypes in the animal kingdom too.
Yeah, definitely. So she will kind of roam in search of the most fit male she can, I guess, because she's putting so much energy and she really wants to get. And so, it's a random question, but do you know if female sharks are bypassing certain male sharks and being oh, nah, he's not fit enough, I'll keep going, or is that kind of what happens?
So where we see that happening is internally. So female sharks have all these incredible internal organs that allow them to sort sperm. It allows them to reject sperm. It allows them to store it as well if they want to. So, there are some times where male sharks are going to be pretty aggressive with a female, and she may not get a choice, but she can always try and swim away if she can, if she's not too exhausted. And then she can make a decision about whether that male will get to have pups or not with her because of all these sorting abilities inside her reproductive organs, which is pretty incredible. So, so they can reject sperm, which I just think is so funny, and they can store it for years and years. They can also just give birth without males too. So this thing called parthenogenesis, which has happened in a lot of aquariums now. They've had lots of sharks for a long time with 0 males in the aquariums, and they thought it was sperm storage if, they had once been in contact with a male. But now we've done a lot of genetics on them. We realise they're actually perfect copies of the mother, the pups. So the mother's just been able to be well, I don't need no man. I'll do it myself.
Wow, that's amazing. Do we know how it works scientifically?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not going to be very good at explaining it, but basically, they're just able to get the egg, the ovary to have an egg and then be able to set off the chain reaction, which is for it to start multiplying, right? And without the activation of a sperm to do that. So they still grow eggs or, go through a reproductive cycle, and then the eggs become viable because the mother's able to set off a trigger that enables that egg to then grow. So I don't know the specifics on it though.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a weird thing. But with the sperm storage, are you saying that she can choose which male she wants to keep? So if she mates with two males 1 week apart, she can store both of them separately, or she might just reject one and keep the one she wants.
Yeah, it depends how many ducts they have for storage and things like that. The first paper I actually ever published was about something called multiple paternity. So that's where a female shark will have multiple pups or babies, and let's say scalloped hammerheads can have up to 30 pups at a time. It's pretty crazy. And they might have different fathers. So a single litter will actually have different fathers, and they'll be half siblings inside the womb. And so they have the ability to, get impregnated by multiple males on the spot, or they have the ability to reject some sperm and then store some for later. Yeah, it's all up to their abilities and choice once reproduction is started.
Wow, that just blows my mind. That's just awesome. And I have to ask too now, so I know some sharks lay eggs, but some sharks are live young. Talk us through a bit of how that works and
so
why.
There's really 4 ways that they can reproduce. So parthenogenesis is what we talked about before, where they're just doing it themselves. You then have viviparious, which means live birth. You then have ovoviparious, which means an egg inside. So it's alive, but it has a yolk sac attached, I think that's it. Yeah, so they have their own internal egg yolk sac, and so that's why they're a little bit different. And then you have oviparious, which just means egg, so that's laid outside of the body. So you have this inside where they're just live wiggling around inside the mother, and then you have ones where they've got a little yolk sac attached and they're kind of growing separate from getting nourishment from the mother. And then you have where they're laying eggs, and there's lots of different sharks that lay all these really cool shaped weird eggs. If you search Port Jackson shark, they have these really strange egg cases that look like a spiral, and they all have different ways that some of them attach them to rocks and stuff, some of them bury their eggs in sand. That's really different. And the live birth ones, I mean, it's pretty crazy, but there are these rays, they're called sawfish or also saw sharks. And saw sharks, we get them here in Tasmania, and so they have a really large nose or rostrum, and that has lots of pointy teeth out the side of it. So if you can imagine, so they give birth to live young, and so if you can imagine being a mother with 8 babies with pointy noses that are jabbing you, it's pretty tough, right? And so I didn't realize this until I was out in the field one day, but we caught a pregnant one and she was ready to pup. And so while she was on board, she started pupping and her little babies were coming out. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like a shark midwife right now. And so we're delivering these babies and it was so beautiful, but they have this sheath over the top of their nose. And so it's sort of gelatinous, but it protects the mother from getting jabbed by all their little noses everywhere. And once they sort of entered the seawater, it started dissolving.
That's fascinating. Yeah, blown away. And I mean, and I've also heard that they'll eat each other in the womb.
Yeah, there is a bit of in vitro cannibalism. So I think, which are they? Are they sand tiger sharks? Maybe other tiger sharks. There are a few species where there can really only be 2 born, right? And so it's the fittest of the fittest. So before you're even born, you are fighting for your life in there. And smaller, it depends on the size, I guess, of the pup inside. But what it means is that mother has invested a lot of time and energy on raising very strong pups that have more of a chance to survive once they're released from her. Because, there's no paternal care once a shark is born, and so it's a pretty scary world to be a baby shark. There's lots of big things out there that can get you, so you kind of want to make sure that you're like raising good, strong children, and that cannibalism, although it sounds really scary and hectic and kind of torturous, is actually very good for the species because it means that the best, fittest pups are surviving.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems quite an unusual thing because I guess she puts a lot of energy into producing so many.
Yeah,
and then they eat each other in the womb, and then it's very weird.
Yeah, I think it feels like it's maybe a sunken cost or something where you're losing all these babies, but actually, I guess it works in an evolutionary way that they're fit, and so the species are going to be strong when they're babies.
And I mean, I think that's the other thing you mentioned, that when they come out and they're babies, they're very vulnerable, but sharks, I think a big misconception is they're not the top of the food chain, are they?
No, and this is, I mean, I'm always harping on about this because in a lot of papers too, or a lot of students, and it's beautiful, but they're like, sharks are apex predators. And it's just a common line we say in science, I guess, and people have gotten used to saying it, but really 90% of sharks are mesopredators, which means they are in the middle of the food web. So there are going to be things like orcas that will eat them. There are going to be bigger stingrays that will eat them. Like there are there are birds that will eat sharks. Like there are a bunch of crocodiles, right? So like they are in the middle of the food web. They are not at the top. And I guess, food, we used to talk about food chains probably when I was in high school and even in early undergrad. And now we really think of them as food webs, where it's much more complicated, the relationships between different species in the ecosystems. But for sure, sharks are not at the top in any way. Most species are really mesopredators.
Yeah, which is, I feel it's a really big shame that we always think of them as these really deadly, crazy animals. And that's what I get asked all the time. Oh, do you see sharks? And I'm like, I'm kind of almost more scared of seeing a big whale with teeth.
Right? Yeah. I think there's lots of other things that kind of scare me under the water than a shark. Yeah.
And so do you have any other really interesting either reproductive facts about sharks? Because I know that's something you're really into, or any other really cool shark facts that you find amazing?
So a really fun fact that I do have about sharks, and I think it's so funny and I don't really know why. So male reproductive organs are claspers, which are like it's kind of a hemipenis, so it's like two penises, and they're sort of rolled cartilage basically. And funnily enough, they are connected to internal testes, like similar to a male human, but the right one is always larger than the left one. And so we don't really know why, but people do lots of dissections and the right one is always bigger.
Wow, and that's across all species?
I mean, no one's looked across all 1,200 species, but it's certainly a common pattern we see for many chondrichthyes or sharks and rays.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
I love that. That needs to be in more of those, 10 facts about sharks.
Yeah. I guess they probably don't want to talk about the size of balls a lot.
Yeah.
It's maybe a bit cheeky.
Oh. And I had one little fact, but I thought it was amazing. The smallest shark is 17 centimeters, I was reading.
Yeah. Is it a cookie cutter shark?
Oh,
or was it something else?
Like a lantern shark.
The lantern, yeah. Sorry, that is the smallest shark. I always forget between those two. Yeah, lantern sharks are tiny and adorable. And obviously the largest shark is like a megamouth or a basking shark maybe. They're pretty big sharks.
Whale shark.
Well, is a whale shark the biggest?
I think it's the biggest fish in the sea maybe, but... Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But that brings me on to one more thing I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
Is that... everyone thinks sharks are big eaters of different things, but not all sharks are really that carnivorous, are they?
No, you get a lot of omnivores, I guess. It depends, I guess, because when I think of sharks, I'm thinking of the group sharks. But if we think about sharks and rays and chimeras, then there's a lot more diversity in the diet. I think I do think a lot of them are eating a lot of carnivorous kind of foods, but you do have big planktonic feeders as well. So again, that's still a carnivore, I guess, if they're eating plankton. But they're not going after big prey. They're actually eating the smallest things in the ocean,
Yeah.
and they're filtering those. So we call those ones filter feeders because they just open their mouths and swim and try and catch everything they can.
Yeah, and they're still technically carnivores, but they're just
Yeah, because
eating
they're
very
still
small
eating
animals.
meat and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they're still eating, if they're eating krill or they're eating fishes or all sorts of things. And then you get, a bunch of the benthic feeding sharks and rays are going to be eating crabs and invertebrates and all sorts of things that live on the bottom. They're going to be eating those. So they have a big diversity in their diet, which is like really fascinating. I just think they're amazing. Like there's this big, huge group of like really unique sharks and rays, and they've been around forever, and they have all these incredible ways of reproducing, and and females have such choice in their reproduction too. Another like excellent fact about that is that because breeding is like pretty rough on a female, and you can imagine if two sharks need to be sort of next to each other, they have to hold on to each other. So the males will often bite female pectoral fins, and females actually have, blue sharks, but all females have thicker skin than males, so their epidermal layer is like way bigger than a male's. But blue sharks have the most, so they have twice the size skin than a male, just to allow the male's teeth to not actually hurt any of their organs or their muscle or anything. And so it's incredible. I just think they're built, everything has evolved to live in this world that we live in, but sharks have just done it in so many unique and beautiful ways, and I'm just always fascinated by them.
Yeah. And just one more quick question. Sorry. So many questions about sharks.
No, it's fine.
So the female, are they often bigger than the male?
It depends on the species. Yeah, it really depends. So there's from my understanding, I can't think of, a bunch of species where, I can think of like a few of the common species where females are larger, like white sharks, the females get way bigger. And, hammerheads, the females are, I don't know. So it depends. It depends on the species, and there isn't like a strong pattern of the females are always bigger.
Yeah.
But certainly, again, if you think evolutionarily, it's in the favour for the female to be larger because she can hold more pups and they can reproduce, and then they can, help bounce back their populations from the current trials and tribulations they're going through.
Yeah. And so if anyone wants to learn a lot more about sharks, or they really want to get into shark research or anything like that, what would your advice be, or what should they do and where should they go?
I have some advice of what not to do. First one is do not watch Shark Week. So, and I know that sounds funny. You might be like, Maddie, what are you talking about? That's where I get all my shark facts from. It sadly doesn't encapsulate the beauty of sharks, and sometimes focuses on them being man-eaters or really scary, or it just, and it focuses on the same 5 or 6 species too. So there's a lot of shark scientists and shark researchers who very much get upset when it's Shark Week. We try and stay away from Twitter and all the social media outlets because I think that it's giving you the wrong idea of what sharks are and how they operate. And I think actual documentaries that, the BBC and David Attenborough is way more factual and is going to cover maybe a more diverse group of sharks and rays. So documentaries are great, but just not Shark Week documentaries. They're not going to give you that much knowledge, let's say. If you're a budding marine scientist and you want to learn more about sharks, go and read those papers. I think I didn't understand how the scientific literature sort of worked early in my undergraduate, and I was definitely not a great student, to be honest, in my undergrad. But now, I really found research, and I love research, and I feel very blessed to be here. But I did, I wasn't the best student and I wasn't getting the best scores, but I saw the value in reading journal articles and papers. So if you go into something like Google Scholar and you type in a shark species name, you can have a look at all the different papers that are written about that. And that's from real scientists out in the field making scientific observations. So it can be kind of dry reading. That's why I say probably for the scientist kids, if they're interested in that, it's probably not a super fun read for someone who just wants, light reading. There's a great website called Shark References, and it's by this guy. He's lovely, and he just loves sharks, is a shark researcher himself, and he compiles all our papers and all the species names and a whole bunch of things in Shark References. So that's a great way to find very specific papers on certain species. It's a quick way to search. How else? I think just, the internet is a magical, beautiful place. Sometimes it's treacherous, sometimes it's beautiful. And I think there's lots of ways for us to gain knowledge about sharks and rays, and just make sure that, it's not on Shark Week.
Yeah, and I think it's so important what you said, like Google Scholar is not just for, scientists like in the lab. Google Scholar can help anyone understand anything about a shark. It's something that I think everyone should get on board with.
Absolutely. I think sometimes maybe a hurdle to get over is the technical language that's used in a field. So, for an ecologist or a biologist, we have been trained to use a certain type of language. And so if you're not trained in that, it may seem a little confronting at the start, but I think anyone can access, like you said, that information and start to learn about it. And even if there are words that you don't understand in the paper, that can be Googled easily and you'd be able to find that answer. But for the most part, scientific papers really do just describe, very simply like what's important, what's the problem that paper's trying to solve, or that knowledge gap. And then it talks about how it went about doing that. And in methods and materials sections, it can be pretty boring. I don't really even read them because it's pretty boring, unless I need to know the information. Because, we have to do it in a way that's reproducible, right? That someone could look at our work and reproduce it exactly. So that's why we have to really write it the way it is. But the results section will talk about numbers and about the data that we found that backs up what we're trying to say, or, what the data says. And then in the discussion, which is like the really juicy bit, so I would suggest, probably reading, like if you're starting reading scientific papers and you don't have a background in research or academia, then I'd say start with the intro and then the discussion, and you'd have a good idea of what that paper did and the kind of knowledge that was there.
Yeah, cool. And if anyone wants to do any like citizen science kind of work with sharks, are there any shark projects that do around citizen science?
Yeah, so in Australia, around the world, there's a few groups that you can go to help out. So I don't know of many apps for sharks and rays. I know that there's always RedMap, which says if you see a range extending species or a species you don't normally see in your area, take a photo of it and put that on RedMap. So that's super helpful. We're certainly seeing more of like in Tasmania, we're seeing more things like Port Jackson sharks and a few carcharodonid species that we don't get often. We've seen them before, but it's been summer and it's been once in a blue moon. Now they're coming more and more. So if you're in Hobart or a range extending area or somewhere where you just don't normally see that species, then definitely log that on RedMap. I think there are other places you can go where you would help pay for the trip, and also then means that you can go on it as well. And so there's a great group run by this lady named Barbara, Dr. Warenga, and Weringer, I can never say her name properly. Sorry, Barbara, if you're listening. And so she runs Sharks and Rays of Australia, and that is up north in Darwin. And so they do a whole lot of sawfish surveys. They do a lot of, I think she's tagging bull sharks, she's tagging sawfish, she's doing a whole lot of stuff. They work with the national rangers up there and a whole lot of First Peoples up there, which is like excellent. So there's that kind of stuff. I know in South Africa, or maybe that's stopped now. So in South Africa, there used to be a lot of citizen science programs for white sharks, but the orcas have really scared away all the white sharks over the last few years. So I think those might be drying up because the white sharks are moving. Yeah, again, like Google is your friend. Google citizen science and shark and see what pops up.
Yeah, and I guess like any kind of shark tourism, like where you're going and seeing sharks on scuba or snorkel, is having usually a positive impact on them, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, it's twofold. So more than half of all sharks and rays, which is, a good 700 species, are threatened by human activity, so mostly fishing. And we know that there's a lot of really threatened species at the moment that are critically endangered and that are getting fished a lot. And so I am always a supporter of where people can see sharks and can see the different diversity of them and can appreciate them for more than just a white shark that's going to bite a human because, there's, like I said, 1,200 of them and they're all beautiful in different shapes and sizes. And so I think that if people get to dive with them, if people get to see them and they're really calm and they have really positive experiences with sharks, then that will make them care just a little bit more. And really what we need is a whole lot of people caring. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world, and so we all care about our things, right? But for me, I care about sharks, and I would love if more people cared about sharks too, and if we just pushed a little harder, making sure that the kind of conservation measures we have in place and making sure that our fishing practices in all sorts of locations are better managed, then maybe we can help recover some populations.
Yeah, and I guess that goes to sustainable seafood and knowing what you're eating. And
Totally, yeah. And a lot of my work now is really tracing and tracking where vessels are catching different species of fish, but also species of shark, whether those sharks are threatened or vulnerable or they're fine, because there are lots of sharks that you can healthily fish and you can have sustainable seafood too. So not all shark fishing is bad. And something to note too is that when a species is considered globally endangered, that doesn't mean that it's locally endangered. So it's important to just double check when people are saying that's super endangered. Well, is it endangered in Australia? Because we have quite high populations of sharks and rays. So sustainable seafood is complicated. It's a part of my research now is helping fishers, define what they've been catching, also helping management authorities figure out what's been caught from a compliance point of view. So it's complicated, but it's certainly, a worthwhile job. And if I can help, provide some advice for management and policy into the future that helps protect a few shark populations, then I've done my job.
Yeah, awesome. Well, if anyone does want to follow your journey on sharks, how should they get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, they can, again, Google is your friend. People can Google me. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff online and you could probably find contact details if you really wanted to get in touch. And then I sometimes, show my diving photos and what I've been up to research-wise on my Instagram, which is Madi Green Marine. So people could follow me there, but I'm not super present on lots of the social media or anything.
Yeah, but I guess if someone's super inspired by you and sharks, especially I think people in school and stuff who are getting, what do they want to do in the future?
Yeah,
It's a really good, especially the start story where you're like, I'm going to be a shark scientist.
Yeah. Don't let anyone, I had lots of people and lots of teachers tell me not to do it, and they will tell you not to do it, but you should follow what you want to do always. So that's my advice to school kids. So if there are, young people, undergrads or anyone like that listening that do want to get in touch, please, you can just Google me and my university email will pop up and they can get in touch, because I always want to give advice to budding marine biologists because it's a great career. It's a tough one, but it's rewarding. And I always want to support people in this field because I didn't necessarily have that support from all my teachers. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I always run into people when they find out what I do and they were like, oh, I was going to be a marine biologist, but my teacher said I shouldn't, and it breaks my heart because we should, if it's a privilege, but we should be able to follow something we love, right? And have a passion and follow that. And if that becomes our career, then what a beautiful thing. But I think, students shouldn't feel boxed in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. Well, thank you very much for being on the show.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Seacreatures Podcast is hosted, edited and produced by myself, Matt Destoni. Big news is that I have a game all about sustainable fishing and ocean literacy coming out. I've been working as part of a team on the Fish Size Project with Asta Orgizonte and Amy Coughlin, and we've made a game called Big Fish. It's about to launch on Kickstarter, or when you're listening, it may have already launched on Kickstarter, and we're just trying to get some support for this game, which we're hoping will bring sustainable fishing and ocean literacy to everyone. To find the game, go to Kickstarter and look for Big Fish Card Game, or jump onto bigfishcardgame.com for more details. Production assistance by George McGrath, and music by the talented and awesome Dan Musil. Be sure to check out his awesome tunes. Also, a big thanks to our Patreon supporters. It really helps with the running cost of the show. And if you'd like to become a Patreon supporter, or if you'd just like to buy the show a coffee to say thanks and help us make more episodes, visit www.mtunderwatermedia.com. Coming up next time on the Sea Creatures Podcast, we're going to be talking to Zoe Keane all about stromatolites. So if you don't know what a stromatolite is, be sure to tune in. This has been the Sea Creatures Podcast. Over and out.